Okay. Sorry that I was a little late getting things working. You're still connecting to audio. So I want to start by finishing off something from last week, which was that strange phrase that the king Sambal. Oops, too far. And what I really want to do is I want to see everything that Ramed Ali had to write about. To write about the this verse. So I think I mentioned it from the outside a little bit. I want to actually read his words. Behold, the king, when he saw that these wicked people, when he saw them, that they were in such a hurry, such a chipazon, right? That language of chipazon is a language that we know from the Haggadah. They were in such a hurry about the, oh my, and now it's talking back at me. I need. Well, the king, when he saw that these wicked people, when he saw them, that they were in such a hurry, okay, there we go. I'm sorry. I had to switch around a little bit so that my computer stopped repeating myself back to me with a delay of about a minute, which is why we now had a minute of silence. All right. The language of chipazon is language that we have in the Haggadah about having to leave in a big rush. Okay, lahalshin et Daniel, to bring lashon hara against Daniel, even when it's true. I mean, it's true. He was davening, but they were trying to bring it in such a way that something bad would happen to him as a result, i.e., that he would get thrown into the lion's den. So miyad hikir shezot hayta kavanatan meikara. He immediately recognized that this had been their intention from the beginning, was to remove, not to remove, lahotzi, to bring forth this gezerah from the king. And so they came and they played on his desire for kavod, and they played on his desire to have the entire kingdom show that it was subservient to him because he was kind of new in his position as king. And so they played on that, and they convinced him to pass this decree. And now he realizes what was behind the decree. And it was evil in his eyes. Okay, very much so. To the point that he worked hard in order to bring various counterclaims in order to try to save Daniel. And he was judging and arguing and, getting into broigas, getting into a balagan with them, okay, until until it was like the evening of that same day, which we heard from one of our mefarshim. We heard that, what does that mean? It was the evening of that same day, that it was, that was already the 30th day. If it had gone past that, the decree would no longer be in effect. So the pasuk had said to us, Adain Malka Kedi Milta, Shma Sagi Ba'as Eloi. So then the king, when he heard this thing, it was very bad. From his perspective, al Daniel, and also on Daniel. And then the king, this verb sam refers back to the king, Baal, Sam Baal. And we're going to hear, what does Sam Baal mean? L'shezvute, in order to save him. V'ad male shimshahu. And he kept doing it. He kept whatever this Sam Baal is. So we've heard generally it's the arguing and going back and forth with these Malshimim until that evening, the evening of that same day. Mishtader lahatzlota. He tried to save him. Valkan yesh levakesh. But at this point, says Ramat Valley, there's something to look into, to request, to want to know. Mahem, what are these tanot that the king brought in order to try to save Daniel? Because it's not lechinam, it's not for no reason at all that the verse says Sam Baal. What is Sam Baal coming to hint at for us? So it's to hint that they were ta'anot shel klum, shelo haya behem mamash. That so we've heard other explanations. We'll go back to review it and put it all into a package when we're done here. But right now, Ramat Valley is saying the king was making stuff up. Okay. There was no substance to the claims that he was making. He was trying to rework how, take things out of their plain meaning. He was doing things that had no real substance to them. All right. And that's why it's Sam Baal, this language of Baal, meaning that it's like bli mamashut, that it's without any reality. V'amnam da ki libi omarli. And now the Ramat Valley says something that's very interesting. He says, however, we should know that my heart, Ramat Valley himself says, my heart says to me what? She'ira zeh el hatzadik b'yom shloshim bilvad. He's the one who told us that it happens on the 30th day. It only happened on the 30th day. Shelo ala biyadam shel rishayim ha'elu limso et Daniel b'sha'at tfilato ela biyom acharon shel hagzera. Because it didn't arise into their hand is the literal Hebrew, right? They didn't succeed. These wicked people didn't succeed in finding Daniel at the time of his prayer, except on the last day of the Gzera. And he continues and he says, Ki haya zeh min hashamayim, because this whole thing, you think that this is because of the wicked people and because Daryavesh was not so as pikeach as he should be and whatever, and that there's anti-Semitism in the world. And that's all true on one level. But he says, She'ira zeh el hatzadik, ki haya zeh min hashamayim, because the whole thing really was from heaven. Kedei she'tzadik yashlim tikuna shel Vana ha'elyona ben be'et milu'a ben be'et chasrona. In order that the tzaddik should complete a tikkun for the moon, for the supernal level of moon, which is, this is something I've been talking about in the Kedushat Levi class, is the sun is the aspect of Or Yashar, and the moon is the aspect of Or Choser. Of light going back, or of what we call hitorut dilatata, of something that where the impetus for it comes from here, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds, rather than just simply giving us good without looking at whether we deserve it or not, which that's the Or Yashar, like the sun. but the moon, which has phases, and the moon is the aspect of Yoshua, and etc. So he's using language when he talks about the Levana Elyona is sort of all those things that the moon stands for, one of which is Knesset Yisrael, one of which is us. And so the tzaddik has to complete some tikkun for the Levana Elyona. And it needed to be through the entire 30 days, because if it's across an entire 30-day period, it's also at the time when the moon is in its fullness, and also at the time when the moon is, as it were, missing pieces of itself. From our vision here on Earth, it appears that the moon is missing pieces of it when all we have is a thin crescent, or even when what we have is less than full. It appears that there's something missing. And whether you're talking about this as a reference to Am Yisrael or any of the other ideas that are tied to this notion of moon, okay, there needed to be a tikkun, and it needed to be a tikkun that covered the entire spectrum of situations. And he needed to do it b'sachanat nafsho, in danger of his life. Ki bakach amad b'nisyono k'ru'ui. Because if he did it with danger to his life and he still did it, okay, so then he's Amad b'nisyono. We talk about Avram Avinu, Amad b'nisyon. In Pirkei Avot, it says that God tried Abraham 10 times, Amad b'kulam, and he stood all of the tests, right? He was still standing after each test. Presumably it means that he succeeded in passing the test. There's machloket there also, but certainly that he was still whole and shalem with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Whether or not that was exactly what Hashem wanted out of him or not, but nothing touched his faith, nothing touched his devotion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hu amad b'kula. Okay, and here too we have that hu amad b'nisyon Kuru'ui, the way it was supposed to be, the way it should be. And also Kuru'ui can mean less often, but can mean as was seen. Okay, in other words, it wasn't enough that he stood the test and that he knew it, or that maybe only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew it, but it needed to be something that was seen by the world. And as a reward for this, Hi tiyeh omedet lo lahatzilo merato. And so this standing of this test of the his success in standing that test will now stand him in good stead is an English phrase. It'll be there in order to save him from the evil that has come upon him. Ki min hatikun lo tavo kalkala b'shum panim el hatzadik hamitake. Because from the repair that the tzaddik is doing, there cannot come any kind of destruction or destruction is maybe the best translation that I have for kilkul. Okay, in any way whatsoever, the tzaddik can't be harmed. It's like the phrase that we have that a shaliach mitzvah is somebody who's on their way to doing a mitzvah is saved, right? Is saved from danger. So that if you're right, reason that sometimes people give somebody money when they're about to go on a journey so that they should give tzedakah at the other end, because that makes them a shaliach mitzvah and that provides protection to them. So here too, the fact that he was involved in this great tikkun, okay, by davening at the risk of his life, and not allowing this gzeira to change his behavior. So because he was involved in this big mitzvah, or mivtza also, this big sort of mission, so that itself stood him in good stead because it protects him. The being a shaliach of a mitzvah, being somebody who's doing the tikkun, saves you from danger. Now, that assumes that you do it correctly. So the more of a tzaddik you are, the more you're somebody who needs to be metaken for the world, for other people, etc. It's possible that if you fall, if you fall from your madrega, if you fall into thinking, look at me, I can do kind of stuff, then you are very much in danger, and probably in greater danger than just a pashut person would have been. Because the higher up you are, the further down you can fall. But the tzaddik, like Avraham Avinu, like Daniel, the tzaddik who stands the test, then he can't have evil consequences come to him as a result of the tikkun, the work that he's doing in the world. Next, so Ramat Valley is bringing some very big ideas here, right? And from this idea, says Ramat Valley, we can actually learn what were these claims that the king was making against the Malshinim. Because he was claiming against the Malshinim. What was he claiming against them? One thing he said was, look, my gezerah was only until 30 days. And perhaps Daniel took the language to mean ad v'lo ad b'chlal, which is a halachic idea that I say you need to do this until the 8th day. Now, until the 8th day, does that mean until the end of the 8th day or until the beginning of the 8th day? Is the 8th day included? Is it up until but not including? Ad below ad b'chlal? Or is it ad ba'ad b'chlal? Is it until and included? And there are all sorts of things that in terms of Brit Milah, there are just all sorts of things that where some of them are ad va'ad b'chlal and some of them are ad v'lo ad b'chlal. And so the first thing that Daryavesh Hamelach tried to say was maybe Daniel simply heard the language of 30 days and heard it as ad shloshim yom, ad tlatin yomin, until 30 days from now, meaning up until the beginning of the 30th day from now. And so today didn't count. You only caught him at it today. He clearly wasn't doing it for the last 29 days, which of course is not true because he was. But you caught him at it today, and today doesn't count because he misunderstood what the gzeira was. But so you can't hold that against him. That was one of the possible claims. And because he misunderstood, so that's when he went back. And the proof of this, says the king, is that you guys didn't find him. In other words, the king thought that they'd been out looking to trap him and looking to find him the previous 29 days as well. And they hadn't succeeded. Min HaShamayim, they hadn't succeeded. But that gave space to the king to say, so clearly he wasn't doing it for the last 29 days. Otherwise, you guys would surely have found him doing it. You were out to get him, right? All right. They know Ru'ui L'Poranut, Mi Shetauto Tului B'Havanat L'Shon Hamoreh Alazman. And he says, and it's not appropriate to put in such danger as throwing him into a lion's den, somebody whose error was dependent on a misunderstanding of the language that is just talking about like the time frame. Okay. Ve'ein danim shogeg kamezid. And you shouldn't judge somebody who makes a mistake in the same way that you judge somebody who is deliberately going against the law. Ve'elu malshinim hayu medaynim in hamelach. And these talebearers were doing this judgment, as it were, okay, together with the king. And they were saying, now, wait a second. Certainly Daniel did the same thing all the other days. Just they didn't succeed in jumping on him and catching him at the time of his tefillah. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't doing it the other 29 days. It just means that today was the first time we managed to succeed. But Melech haya rotzeh lekayem et svarato. And the king, of course, wanted to uphold his explanation of what was going on, kadei lahatzil et Daniel, in order to save Daniel. Even though he also knew in his heart, come on, right? Be real. This is Daniel. We know he davens 3 times a day, right? That there wasn't any, his claim didn't have any real basis to it. And that's why the verse says, Sam bal mamashut. Okay, so he knew, but nonetheless, he was making that claim. Now, I had alluded to one other thing that I also wanted us to actually hear the language of Muhammad Vali, which, let's see if I can find it quickly. If not, I'll skip it. But the question was, where did this gezerah really come from? Okay, not that verse. Okay, he explained, we already heard other people's explanations. Also, he explains pretty much the same way why they first got him to agree that he had made the decree before they told him that Daniel had fallen afoul of the decree. But there's something in here. Is that it? No. It's a very nice Perushim, Pasuk 11, but that's not the one I'm looking for. I was looking for okay, I brought that piece also from outside. Okay. So he'd give an explanation. Why was it that Darius agreed? Why was it that the king agreed to this decree? And so the first piece of it, as it were, let me just do that. The first piece of it was, whatever, like we heard, it was about his pride, it overruled him, et cetera, et cetera. But then he says, you know what? Furthermore, the reason that the decree got passed was because the hearts of kings are in the hand of God. And it was a Kadosh Baruch Hu. It wasn't Darius, right? It's the same sort of thing. I said this, I think, last week also, that when it says Hamelach, Malka, it can be referring to the flesh and blood king that we've been discussing, but it refers to Kadosh Baruch Hu as well. And so he says, V'od she'Hashem yitbarach ratzah laharot et kocho ve'et gvuato b'nei sa'ariyot. So one of the reasons for why this decree got passed, such a actually really pretty strange decree, right? was because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to show his might and his power with the miracle of the lion's den to the entire kingdom of Madai and Paras. Kamosha Ratzala Harod et Kocho ve'Kvoto B'kama Nisim Shasa B'Malchut Kasdim, in some of the earlier miracles that had taken place, like the Kivshan Ha'esh with Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah, etc., that he was showing, God was showing his power outside of Eretz Yisrael, which is an important piece. All right. And since this is a new dynasty, so it was necessary, and a new group of people who were, had the upper hand, it was necessary once again to show, to have new miracles in order to convince them this klipa, okay, this klipa of the zroot. Remember, we had the head, the rosh of zahav, which was the kasdim, and then there are the arms and the upper body, which is of silver, which is medayu pras. And it was and so that's what Ramad Valley is referring to here. Of the zroot is referring to the klipa of the zroot is referring to medayu pras, and that. And to sort of wrest the supernal glory and honor also by these outer forces. Shelo yazidu l'zalzel bo chas v'shalom, that they shouldn't dare to deliberately minimize and disparage HaKadosh Baruch Hu chas v'shalom, because there's this chidush in the malchut, and so they could say, well, yeah, so, God's stronger than the kasdim, but so are we stronger than the kasdim. Okay? So it was God who put into Daryavesh's heart, like we said, the hearts of God, the hearts of kings are in God's hands, to agree with this pretty weird, this right, this boorish kind of advice and counsel that he got from these other ministers. And it wasn't because of the king's own wickedness, where we say by Achashverosh, most of the Midrashim anyway, say by Achashverosh, that, some of them call him a foolish king, but many of them say that he was just as much of a Rasha in the beginning. He was just as much of a Rasha as Haman was, that he wanted to be shut of the Jews just as much as Haman wanted to get rid of the Jews. And so he was really happy to just hand over the problem to Haman and say, yeah, sure, take care of it for me. And so this is to tell us that Daryavesh was not like that. Okay, because he was certainly Zaken v'Chacham, and it wasn't really appropriate that he should fall into such a trap as his officers and ministers set for him, except that HaKadosh Baruch Hu kind of pushed him. So that was another piece. And somewhere in here, I don't remember where it is, and I'm not going to spend any more time on it right now because I want to make progress and do some more psukim. Ramad Valley says also that he wanted to test Daniel. It wasn't just this business of doing this tikkun, but he wanted specifically to test Daniel himself, as opposed to Daniel as somebody, as the tzaddik who's being able to mataken for Am Yisrael. He also wanted to test Daniel in that Daniel was now, like Mishnah Lamelech, okay? He's really almost at the same position like Yosef was. We keep seeing these parallels between Daniel and Yosef, and he wanted to, as it were, make sure that Daniel hadn't let this power and authority go to his head, and that he would, even at risk to his life, maintain himself in his avoda to Hashem and his connection to Am Yisrael, right? Because where is he davening? He's davening Nochach Yerushalayim. He's davening facing into Yerushalayim, Yer Kodesh, and maintaining his connection to the fact that Yerushalayim is mechorav, is that it's been destroyed and for our sins, and he wanted to make sure that Daniel didn't let his new position of being the Sar, who's in charge of the other Sarim, who's in charge of all of the satraps, etc. He didn't to go to his head and say, well, so, I mean, it's not like they're asking me to do something which is us, or they're just asking me to not daven for a month. So I can not daven for a month, and I'll pick up my davening where I left off, or some idea like that. And he wanted to make sure that Daniel wasn't going to do that. And Daniel stood that test as well. All right, fine. So now we're going to go. We're going to switch the share, and we're going to actually look at some new psukim. Okay. So here we are. So the king has been trying. It gets to be the end of the day. And Badain Guvaya Elaine Hargishu al Malka Va'amrin the Malka Da Malka Didat Lamadayu Fras Dikol Asar Ukiam Dimalka Yahakem La Lahashnaya. So then these men who were still thronging about the king, okay, such a neat word, thronging, okay, they like pressing in on him and from every direction, and he couldn't. Think about when you have like lots of noise from lots of different directions, you don't ever know quite where to pay attention to, and it gets to feel kind of threatening at times. And they said to the king, "Know, O king, that the law, the way of Madai and Paras is that every ban, and that's the asar, a ban, something, and kiyam, and every sort of chok, every ordinance of something that you have to do, dimalka of the king, yahakem, has to be fulfilled, has to be upheld. There are no exceptions. La lahashnaya, there's no way to change it. And that is the dat l'madayim paras, that you can't. They prided themselves essentially on being a kingdom of law and not of being a kingdom of, the English word has just lost me, or I've just lost it rather. It's sort of whimsy or caprice. Those are the words I'm looking for. Okay. And that there would be laws, and the laws would be passed, and the laws would be promulgated, and the laws would be made known, and then everybody was responsible for doing them. There was no such thing as ignorance of the law is an excuse. It's not an excuse. Stop with this. You cannot change these things. V'dayin Malka Amar v'haitiv l'Daniel Romo l'guva di Aryavata. So then the king said, let them bring Daniel and throw him into the lion's den. Because various of the Mefarshim say basically based on the previous verse, Ramat Valley also says this, that he was afraid these people pushing in on him, and they, that once they played their trump card, okay, they said, this is the way the law works here. And he was afraid that they would toss him out, that they would use their claim that he wasn't upholding the law and the mores of Madai and Paras to remove him from his throne. And he wasn't secure enough on his throne that he had any security that their rebellion against him wouldn't work. So he did it. It was bad. He didn't want to do it. He'd been arguing against it. We heard how much he didn't want to, but he felt really mamish forced. He was ba'onas. Okay. He was coerced into it. And he gives the order for Daniel to be thrown into the lion's den. And then Ana Malka, he raised his voice, Vamar, and he said to Daniel, Alakach di ant palachle bit dira hu yeshezvinach. Now, it's really interesting. We not me personally, okay, but Ramat Valley and Malbim and almost all of the Mefarshim give Dariush credit here. Ramat Valley goes so far as to say he has a shtickle nevuah. And they read this as a serious sentence and as and mamish as prophecy. Okay. Because what does he say to Daniel? Your God that you serve constantly, Tadir, okay, he is the one who can save you. I tried to save you, basically, is what Dariush is saying. I tried to save you and I failed. But God, who you serve with such constancy and such devotion, he is going to save you. Not that he can save you, he's going to save you. Now, is there another tone of voice in which to read this? Sure, because think of this if it were Achashverosh, or if it were Haman, or if it were Nebuchadnezzar, maybe not. But if it were any one of the kings that we had real problems with, how would they say it? Let's see if that God of yours that you serve so much is going to be able to save you, right? That, in other words, there's a tone of voice with which this sentence could be said. We'll see if that God that you serve so constantly is going to will save you. Or in other words, is it a question? Is it a taunt? Those would be negative ways of reading this. The positive way, which is how Chazal tell us to read it, is that that Dariush has this level of nevuah, and he's essentially promising Daniel. He's saying to Daniel, well, I didn't succeed in saving you, but God will save you. And I know God will save you. You should know that God will save you, not to have to worry about it. All right. So from here, I'm going to read a bunch of psukim. We'll ask some questions. We'll look at some malbim, and we'll come back and next week we'll come back and we'll hear answers to our questions. But I want to get a little further in the story. Okay, so V'hetayid Evan Chada V'sumat al Pum Guba, and a single stone, a really large single stone, was brought, was placed on the mouth of the lion's den, so that nobody could get in and nobody could get out. Okay. V'chatma malka be'izkate u'be'izkat Rav Ravonahi di la tishne tzvu b'Daniel. And the king somehow sealed the placement of this rock. I don't know if they put something across it that they then put their signet rings. Okay, that's what in Izkat is a signet ring, a tabat. So some kind of, plaster or cement or something or other, and to cement the thing into place. And they and he sealed it with his ring, and also the ring of each one of his officers and the satraps and these people who were that nobody should be able to change it or to move it or possibly to be able to go to Daniel's aid. But the point of having it sealed with the rings was so that if the stone had been moved, everybody would be able to see it. So on the one hand, the king is guaranteeing to, and why isn't it enough to just be the king? Right. So there are questions here, right? Why does it have to be both the king's ring, signet ring, and the signet ring of the chieftains, etc.? We'll answer that question because I'm not going to finish the psukim if I stop to answer the questions as we go. Adain azal malka lehechle uvat vat v'dachvan la hanel kademohi v'shinte nadat Elohi. And then the king went to his palace and he tried to sleep, but he didn't bring any dachvan like badach. He didn't bring, there was no entertainment or anything else. None of that was brought before him. Okay. He didn't behave like a king normally behaves. He was in tsar. He was very disturbed and very worried on behalf of Daniel. And so he wasn't doing things to try to distract himself from it in any way. And Vishinte Nadat Elohi, this is the language at the beginning that we're in chapter 6. Chapter 6 is the pasuk, first pasuk in Megillat Esther. V'nadadash Nata Melech, the king's sleep was disturbed. Okay, his sleep was disturbed. He couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, and he kept imagining what was happening to Daniel. And on the one hand, God's going to save him, but how is it going to? And he couldn't sleep. B'dayin malka b'shparpara yakum b'nagha u'b'hitbala leguba di arivata azah. So then the king got up early in the morning, okay, and in a great hurry and pressure, whatever, he went. Doesn't say he ran; it just says he went to the lion's den. And as he got close to the den, to the pit den, whatever, of the lions, he called out to Daniel in a kal atziv, a nervous voice, a sad voice. He and not just called, zak, right? He cried out to Daniel. Okay. Anei Malka, and the king raised his voice for Marla Daniel, and he said to Daniel, Aveda ka chaya alakach di ant palachle betdire haichil l'sheza vutach min ayavata. And he says, Daniel, did the living God, your God, that you serve him with such constancy, was he able to save you from the lions? Did he do a deed in order to save you from the lions? Adayin Daniel imalka milel. And then Daniel spoke with the king. Malka la'al minche, which is the standard opening to speaking to a king. O king should live forever. Elaki shlach malache usgar pum ayavata v'la chabluni. My God sent his angel and closed the mouth, closed up the mouth of the lions, and they did not harm me. Kol kavel di kadamohi zachu hishtakachat li va'av kadamach malka chabula la avde. And for all of this that came before him, so they merited that I was, it was merited that I was to be found for me. All the various things that I had done before God, I guess, Kadmohi, okay, stood me in good stead. And also before you, O king. And so the Chabula, there was no damage was done. Chabula la avdate. No damage was made to me. V'dayin malchus sagi te'ev Elohi ula Daniel amar lahansika min guva v'husak Daniel min guva v'kol chaver lahash techach be di himen belake. Then the king was very happy. Things were very good for him, right? And he said to Daniel, or about Daniel actually, to have him raised up out of the lion's den. And Daniel was raised up from the den. I keep saying lion's den, but from the den, the guva. The gov is the place where lions, actually you'll talk about gov klavim, also a place where like a dog run, a place where that type of animal sleeps and goes away to lick their wounds or whatever. It's their type of living place. It's called a gulf. So, okay. And when they got him up out of the lion's den, they saw that there were no wounds. There was no he wasn't scratched. Forget, he wasn't bitten. He wasn't scratched. He was perfectly fine. Okay. And so when they saw that, so then, right, so is it because he believed in his God, or then everybody else also believed in his God because they saw the great miracle? All right. And so there's some questions. So I think I'm going to call it quits here because we've, maybe I can read a couple more psukim. We're almost up to the hour. Unless, do you have any questions till here that we should add on to these questions, or add on to where we are, where we've gotten him into the lion's den, we've gotten him out of the lion's den. Okay, so because the next part then is sort of the aftermath of the story. So, but Tamir, you have any questions? Nope. Okay. So, well, there you go. Go ahead. Unmute. Yeah. Okay. No questions. Okay. You're talking, but you're muted, so I'm not hearing you. No problem.
Okay.
The computer. I don't have a question. I'm looking forward to listen to the end.
Right, I know. It's like the tent, but we got him into and out of the lion's den today. That's why I wanted to get those psukim done, and then so we'll talk about because there's still some questions that are going on here. You know, why the stone? What exactly is going on with that? You know, where's everybody else? You know, the king runs out to find out what's going on. You know, where are all these people who had, at the moment, at any rate, where are all these people? What's going to happen now that, you know, clearly Daniel has been proven to, I mean, you know, it's like a trial by combat, there was a phrase for it in Christian Europe in medieval days, and I'm blanking on the English yet once again, but they had this notion of if you were in the right, then you would live, and if you were in the wrong, then you would die. The Americans, Rahman al-Islam, when they did the Salem witchcraft trials and whatever, they had this. They had this idea that if you were a witch, you could swim, you could float, and if you weren't a witch, you couldn't. So they tested people to see if they were witches in the Salem witchcraft trials. So the problem is that they threw them into a pond. Okay. Now, if they managed to keep themselves afloat and not to drown, then that was proof that they were witches, and then they burnt them or they hung them or they killed them. If they drowned, well, then they were dead, but they weren't witches. Okay. That one was horrible. Oh, you're laughing about it. And it sounds absurd. Okay. But they actually that is a less than lovely piece of U.S. history. Europe has some equally weird and nasty pieces to it. So whatever. But it's sort of, but here the deal is that if he survived, the decree that was made was that you had to throw him into the lion's den, not that he had to die and not that he had to be put to death. It was, he had to be thrown into the lion's den. So he was thrown into the lion's den. But, the next morning you can let him out of the lion's den if he's not eaten. So he wasn't eaten. So you let him out. And with our particular story, that's the end. It's not like, and if he doesn't die that way, then we're going to get him a different way. That wasn't part of the original decree. So you can't, just like you can't change the decree in any other way, you can't change the decree this way either. But yeah, so it's this trial by fire, trial by combat, trial by whatever, but so sometimes they get those kinds of trials. Yeah, now I can. But you're frozen. So I wasn't hearing you, and now I'm just seeing you now. Okay, now you're moving again. Okay, go.
You too. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so we will go further next week. Next week we will be baking matzah in the morning. Next week on Tuesday, if you signed up, right? It's for Tuesday morning.
I didn't sign up yet.
Okay. So it's up to you.
I'm going to, I try to find your email. I'm signed up, and I hope I get then more information about it.
Okay. Do you need me to send it to you on WhatsApp again? Here, let me just stop the YouTube, because now